What if the silver screen wasn't a sanctuary, but a mirror reflecting the fractures of the soul? In Hollywood's golden age, genius was worshipped. Spotlight bathed the gifted in gold. Applause echoed like divine approval. But what the cameras didn't show, what the tabloids misread as scandal, was something darker, deeper. A quiet unraveling, hidden beneath perfect cheekbones and Oscar-worthy smiles. These weren't mere stars. They were conduits. Vessels of raw emotion who channeled madness so convincingly because, for many, it was already inside them. The line between method and meltdown blurred until performance bled into personality. Was it acting or confession, catharsis or collapse? Vivien Leigh dazzled the world with Scarlett O'Hara, all while battling a mind she couldn't trust. Montgomery Clift sculpted vulnerability into art while self-destructing behind closed doors. And Marlon Brando, hailed as a god, couldn't silence the chaos that fame only amplified. This isn't a list of breakdowns, it's a reckoning. A look into what happens when the demand for brilliance devours boundaries. When directors yell, "Cut," but the character doesn't leave. When applause becomes addiction, and when art becomes poison. Because in Tinseltown, the price of genius is often sanity. And those who dared to feel too much burned brightest just before they broke. So the question isn't whether these stars were mad, it's whether madness was the cost of making us believe. And behind the velvet curtain, some performances never ended. Fact Hasson, Montgomery Clift, the beautiful ruin. They called him the most beautiful man in Hollywood, but Montgomery Clift never saw that man in the mirror. Before Brando, before Dean, Clift redefined masculinity on screen. Sensitive, haunted, fragile. But his real-life torment ran deeper than any role he played. After a horrific car crash in 1956, his face was never the same and neither was his spirit. Hollywood scrambled to preserve his image, but Clift was already unraveling, retreating into painkillers, alcohol, and isolation. He would stare at his reflection before scenes, whispering lines with a hollow voice, trying to remember who he was playing because he no longer knew who he was. Directors claimed he glowed on camera. In reality, he was dissolving in slow motion. Elizabeth Taylor once saved his life after finding him unconscious, bleeding, and broken. But not even she could rescue him from himself. The studios tried to label him method actor, tragic star, alcoholic. But none of those captured the quiet despair of a man whose performances came not from technique but from trauma. In the end, Montgomery Clift wasn't acting. He was surviving, or at least trying to. Fact #2. Vivien Leigh, Madness in Technicolor. She won 2 Academy Awards, played 2 of the most iconic women in cinema. But the real drama of Vivien Leigh's life was not written in any script. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder before the term even existed, Leigh's life swung between euphoric brilliance and crippling despair. Her role as Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire, a woman descending into madness, was eerily close to autobiography. Those who knew her said she didn't play Blanche. She became her. During productions, she would vanish into long silences, emerge in manic bursts, then crumble in private. Laurence Olivier, her husband, adored her, but even he called her a volcano wrapped in silk. Behind the glamour was a mind in revolt. She once walked naked through a hotel corridor, thinking she was still on stage. Another time, she locked herself in a dressing room and screamed lines from Gone with the Wind for hours, as if rehearsing for a reality that no longer existed. The tragedy wasn't that she lost her grip on reality. It's that Hollywood rewarded her more, the deeper she slipped. Fact 4-2. Richard Burton, Drowning in Brilliance. He spoke Shakespeare like a thunderclap, each word drenched in fire and fury. But Richard Burton wasn't just acting, he was trying to drown out the silence inside. A son of a coal miner, Burton clawed his way to the top with voice, intellect, and danger in his eyes. Yet behind that charisma was a man addicted not just to alcohol, but to the weight of his own genius. He once confessed, "I have an insatiable need to be brilliant." He drank like he performed, excessively. Between takes, he'd recite entire plays from memory, then black out from the bottle in his hand. Directors said he was magnetic. His colleagues said he was imploding. His marriages, especially to Elizabeth Taylor, were volcanic, passionate, destructive, and cyclical. Each performance fed off his chaos, and each success deepened the void. At one point, he refused therapy because, "If they fix me, I might stop being interesting." Richard Burton feared healing more than he feared breaking, because for him, the torment was the source of the art. Fact #4. Frances Farmer, When Rebellion Looked Like Insanity. She didn't smile for the cameras, she snarled at them. Frances Farmer was the anti-star before Hollywood even knew how to punish one. Outspoken, politically defiant and uninterested in fame, she was branded difficult the moment she refused to play by the studio's rules. But what began as defiance was soon recast as delusion. After several public outbursts and a refusal to conform, she was institutionalized against her will. The headlines screamed, "Insane," but the reality was murkier. Inside the asylum, she allegedly endured electroshock therapy, beatings, and even a rumored lobotomy, though the latter remains contested. What's undeniable is this: Frances Farmer wasn't destroyed by madness. She was destroyed by a system that confused non-compliance with insanity. In later years, she re-emerged, scarred, subdued, and spectral. Her voice, once defiant, became distant. She said, "I was never insane, I just didn't play the game." And in old Hollywood, that was madness enough. Fact #5. Gene Tierney, the face that paid the price. Her beauty was immortal. Her anguish was invisible. Gene Tierney looked like a porcelain goddess, perfect, poised, untouchable. But beneath that facade was a woman shattered by grief, guilt, and a cruel twist of fate. During World War II, she volunteered at the Hollywood canteen, unknowingly contracting rubella from a fan. She was pregnant at the time. Her daughter was born deaf, partially blind, and severely disabled. Tierney never forgave herself. That guilt festered. Her mental health spiraled. She was hospitalized multiple times for depression and suicidal ideation. Electroshock therapy left her memory fragmented. One day, she walked into a department store and couldn't remember her name. A stranger recognized her and asked, "Aren't you Gene Tierney?" She replied, "I used to be." Hollywood adored her face, but it never looked closely enough at what it was hiding. Fact #6. Peter O'Toole, setting himself on fire. He had eyes like frost and fire and a soul that couldn't decide between the two. Peter O'Toole was born for grandeur. Lawrence of Arabia made him immortal, but it was his volatility off-screen that blurred the line between myth and man. He drank until morning, performed until collapse, and wrote poetry about his own self-destruction. Friends called him brilliant. Bartenders called him irregular. O'Toole once described acting as diving into the abyss with a grin, but the abyss stared back. He suffered severe medical complications from alcohol abuse at one point, nearly dying from pancreatitis. Yet he refused to slow down, claiming, "Sobriety makes everything too clear." What made him magnetic also made him unmanageable. He was chaos in tailored suits. He didn't act like he was on fire. He was on fire, and everyone watched him burn beautifully. Fact #7. Judy Holliday, too smart to survive the spotlight. She played dumb blondes better than anyone because she was smarter than everyone. Judy Holliday had an IQ reported to be over 170. Fluent in multiple languages, gifted in music, and razor-sharp in wit, she turned ditzy into a weapon. Her characters stumbled adorably, but she never did. Off-screen, she was politically outspoken, intellectually intimidating, and fiercely private. And then, the blacklist came. Accused of communist sympathies during the McCarthy era, Holliday was hauled before Senate investigators. She didn't rage, she didn't cry. She answered their questions in the same breathy voice she used in her comedies, disarming them with performance. They didn't know they were being outwitted, but the toll was real. Roles dried up. Her health declined. She developed breast cancer in her 30 seconds, and despite brief recovery, it returned. She died at 43, still brilliant, still misunderstood. Judy Holliday wasn't driven mad. She was silenced because genius in a woman, wrapped in humor, was a threat the industry couldn't categorize. Fact #8. Veronica Lake, the wave that broke too soon. Her peekaboo hair became a national obsession until it became a curse. Veronica Lake was the embodiment of 1,940 seconds glamour, aloof, sultry, and untouchable. But the image was a studio invention. Off-screen, Lake struggled with alcoholism, clinical depression, and the trauma of a childhood spent in instability. She was labeled difficult on set. Her career crumbled as fast as it rose. By the 1,950 seconds, she was broke, divorced multiple times, and working as a bartender in Manhattan under an assumed name. Patrons didn't recognize her or didn't care. In her memoir, she wrote, "You could put all the talent I had into your left eye and still not suffer from impaired vision." That wasn't humility, it was despair. Veronica Lake vanished from Hollywood, not because she was forgotten, but because the industry refused to accommodate women who came undone. Fact #9. Marlon Brando, the man who couldn't escape himself. He changed acting forever, but never figured out how to be himself. Marlon Brando was more than a performer. he was a revolution. The raw, unfiltered rage in A Streetcar Named Desire, the wounded charisma of On the Waterfront, the quiet apocalypse of The Godfather, all came from a man who was terrified of being seen. Brando despised fame. He called acting lying for a living, yet he couldn't stop. He sabotaged interviews, gained weight to hide from roles, and retreated into his island in Tahiti, trying to outrun the myth he'd become. His personal life was riddled with tragedy, family turmoil, loss, and scandal. Friends said he was generous to a fault. Others said he was unreachable. He once told a journalist, "People only love me when I'm pretending to be someone else." Brando wasn't a recluse. He was a man trapped in the image of his own legend, and even he didn't believe the performance anymore. Fact Hassan 0. Barbara Payton, stardom as a slow suicide. She was blonde, bold, and burned too fast for Hollywood to handle. Barbara Payton rose to fame in the 1,950 seconds as a sultry starlet with sharp features and sharper instincts. But while she played femme fatales on screen, her real downfall came from a chaotic spiral of addiction, scandal, and self-destruction that unfolded in public view. After a stormy love triangle that led to fistfights and tabloid obsession, studios blacklisted her. She turned to alcohol, then drugs. Acting offers disappeared. So did friends. By her late 30s, Payton was prostituting herself for a few dollars a night on Sunset Boulevard. Her final interview was given from a broken-down apartment, where she admitted, "I was the perfect example of the American dream gone to hell." She died of heart and liver failure at 39 alone, broke, and forgotten by the industry she once enchanted. Barbara Payton didn't just fall. She documented her collapse, and Hollywood looked away. Fact Hassonon, Klaus Kinski, possessed by the performance, no one ever knew if Klaus Kinski was acting or being exorcised. Famed for his intense collaborations with Werner Herzog, Kinski's performances felt like seizures of the soul. He screamed, wept, collapsed, exploded, often in one take. Behind the scenes, he was volatile, paranoid, and violent. Crew members feared him. Co-stars avoided him. Herzog once said, "He was the best actor I ever worked with and the most insane human being I ever met." Their film Aguirre, The Wrath of God, captured Kinski at his most manic. Eyes blazing, body twitching with something unnameable. That wasn't direction. That was possession. Rumors of abuse and psychotic episodes surrounded him, adding to his mythos and menace, but Kinski never apologized. He embraced the chaos. He was the chaos. He didn't break character because there was no character to break, just a man devoured by his own madness. Fact Hasson 2. Patty Duke, the child star with two voices. She won an Oscar at 16 but couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. Patty Duke was a prodigy, the youngest to win Best Supporting Actress for The Miracle Worker, a household name by her teens. But behind her rise was a brutal machine. She was manipulated by guardians, isolated from family, and fed amphetamines to keep performing. As she aged, the cracks widened. She suffered extreme mood swings, bouts of paranoia, and episodes of self-harm. For years, she was misdiagnosed, mismedicated, misunderstood. Only in the 1,980 seconds was she finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Instead of hiding, she spoke out, becoming one of the first public figures in Hollywood to openly discuss mental illness. But even in her honesty, she remained a mystery to herself. She once said, "I have two very distinct people inside me. One's loud and electric. The other just wants to disappear." Patty Duke didn't fade away. She split and let the world see the seam. Fact Hasson 3. Kim Stanley, becoming the role until it consumed her. She was called the female Brando, but Kim Stanley didn't act. She disappeared. Known as one of the most gifted stage and screen performers of the 20th century, Stanley was revered by peers and feared by directors. She didn't perform roles, she became them, often to the point of emotional collapse. For her, the line between self and character wasn't blurred, it was erased. In Seance on a Wet Afternoon, she played a woman so delusional, the crew worried she had genuinely lost her grip. Off camera, Stanley was reclusive, suspicious, and prone to violent mood swings. She quit acting several times, citing mental exhaustion and a hatred for the industry that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Her later years were spent in obscurity, teaching, acting with a zealotry that frightened some students. She believed performance was exorcism, and if it didn't hurt, it wasn't real. Kim Stanley didn't leave pieces of herself in every role. She left the whole thing and had nothing left when the curtain fell. Fact Hasson 4. Margaret Sullivan, the perfectionist who broke herself. Her voice was soft, her standards were brutal. Margaret Sullivan was known for her ethereal presence and tragic vulnerability, especially in classics like The Shop Around the Corner. But behind that delicacy was an obsession with control and perfection. She refused to play the studio game, rewriting scripts, clashing with executives, and demanding reshoots often out of self-loathing, not ego. Privately, she struggled with depression and chronic hearing loss, which she hid from almost everyone. The isolation of her condition worsened over time, fueling bouts of paranoia and emotional withdrawal. She feared losing control more than death itself. In 1960, she was found dead in a hotel room. The official cause: barbiturate overdose. Some called it accidental, others weren't so sure. Her children later struggled with mental illness themselves. One would die by suicide, another institutionalized. Margaret Sullivan never wanted to be adored. She wanted to be flawless until the pressure crushed her. Fact Hasson 5. Nicolas Cage, the performance that never ends. He didn't just act, he channeled. Nicolas Cage has become a paradox. Oscar-winning actor, internet meme, and cult figure all in one. But behind the eccentric roles and wild-eyed monologues is a man who's blurred the boundary between character and identity for decades. He calls his style nouveau shamanic, a fusion of possession, myth, and raw emotional access. To play Leaving Las Vegas, he drank heavily and isolated himself for weeks. For Vampire's Kiss, he ate a live cockroach on camera. He speaks often of dreams, energy fields, and past lives. Is it method, madness, a coping mechanism? Those close to him say he lives in a heightened state, never quite grounding himself. Financial ruin, public mockery, and personal loss have shadowed him. Yet he keeps performing louder, weirder, deeper. Cage once said, "I don't act, I feel," and that can be dangerous. Maybe he never stepped out of character. Maybe he's just made performance his only form of reality. Fact Hashonix. Marilyn Monroe, the dream drowning in pills. She was the fantasy of a nation and the tragedy it refused to face. Marilyn Monroe embodied desire, vulnerability, and charm. But what the public adored was a carefully constructed illusion. Norma Jean, the girl behind the name, was riddled with anxiety, abandonment, trauma, and a paralyzing fear of being unwanted. She was medicated to wake up, to sleep, to perform, to exist. Her days were a carousel of barbiturates and champagne, therapists and tabloid photographers. Directors complained she forgot lines. Co-stars whispered that she was fragile, but the truth was deeper. She wasn't fragile, she was breaking. The more Monroe became an icon, the less she could be human. She once said, "I'm trying to find myself. Sometimes that's not easy." On the 5th of August 1962, she was found lifeless, alone, naked, surrounded by pills. Officially ruled a probable suicide. Unofficially, still debated. Monroe didn't die because she was weak. She died because she was too seen and never truly known. Fact Hasson 7. Elizabeth Taylor, addicted to everything but peace. She was royalty in a town that invented its own god. Elizabeth Taylor lived many lives: child star, femme fatale, tabloid queen, humanitarian. But behind the diamonds and violet eyes was a woman in constant motion, chasing relief through love, fame, and excess. She married 8 times, battled chronic pain, near-death experiences, and more than one nervous breakdown. She was addicted to alcohol, pills, and emotional extremes. At one point, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center, making her one of the first celebrities to publicly seek rehab and survive it. Her performances were mesmerizing because they were rooted in truth. The ache behind the glamour, the fury beneath the beauty. She gave everything to every role because it was the only way to silence the noise. Taylor once said, "I've been through it all, baby. I'm Mother Courage." But courage doesn't mean peace. It just means she kept going no matter the damage. Fact Hasson 8. Peter Sellers, 1,000 Faces, and none his own. He could be anyone except himself. Peter Sellers was a genius of transformation. Clouseau, Strangelove, Chance the Gardener. He vanished into characters so completely, it felt magical. But magic, in his case, masked a crisis of identity. Off-screen, Sellers was depressive, anxious, and plagued by a sense of hollowness. Friends described him as charming one moment, abusive the next. He once told his wife, "There is no me, I do not exist." The more he performed, the more he splintered. He relied on psychics, spiritualists, and pills, suffered heart attacks in his 30 seconds, isolated himself between films. On set, he was brilliant. Off set, he was often unreachable. Even his children described him as a stranger. Peter Sellers didn't lose himself in the role. He was only the role, and when the cameras stopped, so did he. Fact Hassonanen, Gena Rowlands, when the role never leaves. She didn't just play madness, she embodied it, cell by cell. Gena Rowlands, muse and wife of filmmaker John Cassavetes, became known for her raw, emotionally devastating performances in films like A Woman Under the Influence. But those performances came at a cost. Rowlands threw herself so deeply into her characters that colleagues worried she might not return. She once filmed a breakdown scene for 8 hours straight, refusing to break, even when the camera stopped. Afterward, she locked herself in her trailer for days. Cassavetes described directing her as watching someone bleed out for art. Rowlands herself admitted that after some roles, she'd need months to recover, not physically, but psychically. The line between her own thoughts and those of the characters blurred. Her children recalled her shifting moods, unexplained absences, and long silences at dinner. She never spoke of mental illness, but she hinted at something darker. If I had to play normal all the time, I'd go insane. Gena Rowlands didn't break on screen, but the strain of not breaking might have left invisible scars. Fact 20. Shia LaBeouf, a modern descent in real time. His spiral wasn't hidden in history books. It played out on YouTube. Shia LaBeouf started as a child star and became a critical darling. But somewhere between Transformers and performance art, his identity began to fracture. He wore paper bags over his head that read, "I am not famous anymore." He live-streamed himself watching all his movies, crying, cringing, dissociating. He was arrested, hospitalized, accused, canceled, embraced, and condemned, often in the same year. His collaborations with artists blurred the line between vulnerability and spectacle. One exhibit invited the public to sit silently with him while he wept. Another involved strangers confessing their traumas as he listened in silence. Behind it all was pain, childhood abuse, PTSD, addiction. Diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder, LaBeouf oscillated between rage and apology, therapy and relapse. He once said, "The only thing that makes me feel real is the performance. Everything else is just noise." In an age of curated personas, LaBeouf's madness wasn't masked, it was monetized. Bonus fact: the study Hollywood tried to bury. In 1957, a quiet academic paper surfaced in a psychiatric journal. Its title? Psychoneurotic Tendencies in Professional Performers. The study, conducted by a team of UCLA psychologists, examined over 200 actors, writers, and directors working under the studio system. Their conclusion was jarring. Performers exhibited significantly higher rates of neurosis, depression, anxiety, and identity dissociation than the general population. The cause? The researchers suggested that the act of repeated emotional self-exposure combined with the instability of the industry created cracks in the personality. They called it identity erosion. Studio heads dismissed it immediately. Some called it nonsense. Others pressured the journal to withdraw the paper entirely. It was quietly buried, never publicly acknowledged by Hollywood again. But the findings lingered. Whispers of it passed among actors. Rumors grew that studio doctors used the data to predict who might break and who could be exploited longer. The full study has never resurfaced. Copies were said to be lost in a warehouse fire. Others claim it was simply locked away, like so many inconvenient truths. But if you ask around, especially among the old guard, you'll hear this phrase repeated like a curse. They always knew we'd crack. That was the point. They lit up the screen. And one by one, they burned out slowly, brilliantly, tragically. Behind the velvet curtain of Hollywood's golden age, genius often came hand in hand with suffering. These stars weren't broken by accident. They were designed to break, molded, magnified, and then discarded when the cracks showed. So we ask you, was madness the true cost of greatness? Or did the audience simply cheer louder when the pain looked beautiful? Tell us. Which performance felt too real to be just acting? And more importantly, at what point does art become self-destruction?